I wanted to talk to you about linked open data and ontologies, which is a topic that I like, but it's actually very related to open science and can be used as a tool for open science, especially for publication reviewing, and also if you want to review the literature for a state of the art, can be very useful. Yeah, it's a paper from 2011 written by Kauppinen and Mira. It is Espindola. So just a quick introduction to linked data, not linked open data. This one is not open. You might have noticed that when you're doing a search on Google, you have a list of results. And usually this list of results is done through keywords search. So when they found the relevant keywords, they will give you the results that contain those keywords. So this method is not very intelligent. They just find the right words and find the documents with the right words and give them to you. They have recently implemented something a bit more intelligent about 10 years ago, which is called the Google Knowledge Graph. For example, if I type in Marie Curie, it will not only show the results that talk about Marie Curie, that have the keywords Marie Curie, but also a small knowledge box about the person Marie Curie, which is quite impressive. They understood that it was a person that I was looking for, and not, for example, I don't know, the high school Marie Curie or something like that. So how do they do that? They have actually implemented a knowledge graph where these textual data that can be found, for example, in the Wikipedia page of Marie Curie has been transformed into machine-readable data that can be used by the search engine or by any other machines to make some sense of the data and bring some semantic to the data and not just read the symbols, the keywords. So of course, Google is not really the master of transparency. So for example, in the Google knowledge box, I rarely have any source of where the data comes from. But actually, most of the data comes from Wikipedia, which this time is open and transparent and cite the sources. So what you usually have on the Wikipedia page is this textual data that is readable by human beings. But actually what is hidden behind is also a knowledge graph, and you can find it and browse it on, for example, Wikidata or DBpedia. There are two projects of knowledge graphs for Wikipedia. And what is behind this is something like that, which is actually written in a machine-readable language. It's called RDF, Resource Description Framework. And if you want some more details, we can talk about it later, but I won't dive into it right now. So this is very useful because the machines are able to read that, and this helps them making some sense of the data and find the relevant results for you, even if you have not explicitly asked for it. Find that you're looking for a person, that you want the birthday, the birthplace, whatever you like. Okay, so what if we did the same for scientific papers? That would be nice, right? Like you could find all the scientific papers related to a topic. For each paper, you would have the links to the data that have been used for the experiments, the protocol of the experiments, with the right definitions of the concepts that were used within the framework, and maybe links to the other papers that were used to define the framework or the experiment or whatever. The links to similar experiments or experiments that use the same data. And the data could also be published freely so that you can reuse them and test the experiment yourself, as well as the code. So all of this could be achieved in the ideal world using the linked open data and the RDF, the resource description framework that I talked to you about. So this make the textual data from a scientific paper into a machine-readable data that can be browsed on the web, on the semantic web. Okay, so we actually have 4 bullets. So this is the bullets that have been identified by the paper that I'm talking about now. Before, it's just a quick introduction before. So they have identified four main points. The first one is the linked data that I've already presented to you, and that uses the resource description framework, the RDF. But they also, so this is mostly focused on papers for computer science, when you actually have experiments that you want to reproduce and compute on your own computer. So for this, what is ideal is to use a web-based environment, such as the R project, the Jupyter Notebook, etc., so that people can actually test it themselves on their machines. And in order to do that, you also need to make the data that are used for the computing the experiment, to make also these data available on the web, on the internet, and provide an access for cloud computing. So I'm not detailing these points too much because it's really something specific to computer science papers. However, the last point is, I mean, it works for everybody, not just computer science, but it's about Creative Commons, which is a license format, which also helps detect, plagiarism, or makes it easier to identify what you are able to reuse with the right credits and everything. And believe it or not, but these Creative Commons are actually also, I don't know if I can click the link. Yes, can I? Look at that. You can also describe it using the RDF format. Nice, huh? Okay. So then they give two scenarios of application. The first one is a research scenario. So you are a researcher and you want to use linked open science in your paper. So here is a scenario of Mira. I don't know, we don't have to detail the whole scenario. Either we can read it together and talk about it, or we can talk about the technical details of RDF. I have like two options here at this point.
Let's read it.
Let's read the scenario.
Yes.
So Mira makes research about the deforestation process in the Brazilian Amazon rainforest. She has just completed a study of this area of more than 5 million square kilometers. The data she has used in the study is partially provided as linked data by existing sources, such as geonames, sorry for the 15, that was probably a reference, and partially generated from other data sources by methods that Mira has developed during the research and implemented in R. So at this point, you see that the data is already available on the web. She has used a data set called geonames that was already available and that can be reused by anybody who reads the paper. Then she decides to submit the work for a relation to a journal. For this, she signs in the journal submission system, registers a new paper, and receives a URI for it. So URI, it's something that I didn't detail yet, but it's very specific to RDF. And it's actually crucial to RDF. It's the equivalent of a URL. In the web, you have URLs to identify documents. In the semantic web, you have a URI to identify anything, not just documents. But we can explain.
What is the full form? Universal Resource Identifier?
Yes, absolutely. She uploads the article as a PDF, each of the latex source files, scripts, blah, blah, blah. URIs of datasets that she has used, and selects the Creative Commons license for each of the resources. So some of the linked datasets created by others are already online. Cool. And some of them she has created during the study. They get now published in the cloud, provided by the publisher. So this is an example of how you can use linked open science tools in your research work. And then another scenario would be for the reviewer. So John has accepted to review a paper on analysis of deforestation process in the Brazilian Amazon rainforest. He opens up the review environment and can see not just the final article, but also the related datasets and methods the author, Maria, has used in the study. So he can see that exactly the same methods that are reported in the paper are also in the scripts that manipulate the datasets. And he executes the method one by one. So this is like really a reproducible experiment, a paper that you can actually reproduce yourself on your local computer by using the cloud environment, and see how they use and manipulate the data sets in order to produce the results. Also, the results can be depicted as figures, and so he can also maybe interact with the figures. If the figures were, I don't know, had a scale that he wants to change, maybe to see how it would be interpretable in another way. This can also be done through this. And then he can also identify what in the research is novel, what is not already available on the web through the linked data. And he can also look up terms that he was not aware of from the Wikipedia, because Maria has given links to the according concepts that she has used in her paper. So yeah, at the end, you accept the paper with minor modifications, blah, blah, blah. And yeah, that's it. So maybe just to conclude with these scenarios, you can see the 4 bullets that I presented earlier. They have applications for the various steps of what an executable paper should be able to have. So it should be, of course, executable. And this can be done using the 3 first tools that I presented to you. So putting your data on the web and making it interactive through cloud computing in an open source environment. And then something, okay, I won't go through them all, but you can look at it. And something also interested, yes, the provenance of the data can be traced using linked data. I can come back to it later if you want to know more details about that. And also, yes, it's also less prone to viruses because you're using a cloud environment. So it's usually more secure than a local machine. Something that they didn't mention and that I still thought would be interesting to say is that not everything is good with cloud computing, because it can be also a bit harmful for the environment. So sometimes it's also best to try your experiment locally, and then if it works, you can make it available on the web, but maybe like don't run the experiment too much using the cloud computing. I mean, it depends. Like this is debatable, but they didn't mention it at all, and I thought it would be interesting to discuss it as well. And yeah, detective plagiarism, we already talked a bit about that. So yeah, now at this point we can discuss, or else I have more details. Up to you. Yes.
For the cloud, so the cloud storage of where you put all of your data, it's given by the journal on which you want to submit your paper.
Oh, so not necessarily. If we are in an open science thing, it would be like any open access database of your choice, I guess.
So you can put as many data as you want on this database, let's say.
Theoretically, yes. I haven't really explored this point any further. I mostly focus on the first point about linked data. So I don't really know how it would work in practice for using the cloud computing environments, open source cloud computing environments. I don't really know how it would work. But I guess, like for example, at Inria, because I'm employed by Inria, we use a local Inria server that we make accessible to everyone who wants to see it. So yeah, in our case, this is what we do, but I don't know in general. Anyone has an idea?
NIH also has something very similar. So the recent print is when you're funded by NIH, you have to make the data available. So they have their own platform where you can upload enormous amount of data and people can freely access it. I think it's OCSF, something like that. I don't remember the name exactly. But yeah, I have seen a lot of data from there and downloaded it as well, which is a nightmare because the data is not properly arranged.
It's also done a lot frequently by labs that are working together or labs that want to share the work. So for instance, if you're a community that's working on the same topic, like for example, we're working on songbirds and there are several groups across the world that are working with songbirds. So they have now created this this framework where the data can be put. So everyone who wants to work with data of the sort without having to collect such data, if the data has already been collected, can download it from there.
But usually the data is made available only after it is published, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
And sometimes, sometimes it is closed inside the community, which will be using it, and it's still made available before. Yeah.
Okay.
How long is it stored? I'm very curious because in my case, for example, data is terabytes and terabytes of images for a single experiment. So I'm kind of concerned about the space that it takes and the duration. Like, at what point after an article publication do you decide to scrape it off the web?
That's a good question.
That's a very good question.
No idea.
I'm not sure, but that's something that we need to look into. Because also what Chloé said, it's really bad for the environment to have such data being stored for such a long time. It's very polluting.
Yeah.
I had a question about Wikipedia use, because it's also a matter of time duration. You know, what if in 10 years from now the page has evolved so much that it doesn't really make sense anymore towards the concept you were trying to originally explain in your article? And what about the fact that it's not like scientifically reviewed, that, you know, it's a collaborative effort that can have mistakes in it?
Yeah. So on the first point, actually, you don't directly link it to a Wikipedia page, but you rather link it to the Wikidata project. And using again the RDF framework, you have a way to trace, for example, the date that the data you want to use.
So you have a screenshot basically of what was
Exactly.
like at the time. Okay.
Yes, actually, you can think of it as a big graph, and for each item you have like everything: the provenance, the date, the content, and you can also see the timeline of how it has evolved. So you would have everything. On the second point, the fact that it's not peer reviewed, it's not. That's true. But the idea of having like collaborative knowledge bases is the whole point of linked open data. The idea is really to have like a web of collaborative data that everyone can contribute to. And if you notice something wrong, then you should absolutely point it and discuss it with the community. So it's also of course, there can be issues with Wikipedia, but the fact that it's open source and collaborative also makes it less prone to errors than, for example, what you can have in predatory journals.
Also, you can look at the references from below, and then you can cross-reference it after going through the paper.
Exactly. In Wikipedia, you always have the sources and the
otherwise it's always
a
written
lot
like
more,
cited.
usually the information that can't take into account. Especially
Yes.
in the case of some explanation for a concept, which is part of something bigger.
Yeah.
Sometimes they write it that the citation is needed until. Yes, that makes sense.
And also, I talked about Wikipedia because you know it, but there are other databases that are more scientific and where you have, for example, the Cognitive Atlas for cognitive science. You have like a lot of items. Again, it's collaborative. And for each one, you know if it's reviewed or not. So most of them are unreviewed because it's kind of new and not very used yet. But you also have like, for example, something that is very, very used is all the ontologies from the Ober Foundry for biological and biomedical ontologies. So this can be useful to annotate, for example, any data from biological experiments. And this is, again, this is much more reviewed because it's very used by the scientific community. For example, the gene ontology is like super popular for people working with genetics. So, you know it.
Yeah, it is very famous.
So it's this way scientists can agree on definitions that they want to use and reuse them to annotate their data. So it makes everything more easy to it makes everything more compatible and interoperable.
Isn't it very similar to the BLAST or FASTA format, right? Which is available at NIH website? No?
What format?
I'm not sure.
For doing the gene searches, I think it is very identical to this one. I'm not sure.
Maybe you can explain what it is, because I'm not sure.
I did it a long time ago, like 15 years ago. It's basically you enter your gene sequence and then it will try to find out the similarities between which genes are present in which organism at which loci. Basically, it will just give you a phylogenetic tree if you want to. Okay. So that is something which is similar to this, I think, and because the tag you can always tag it, and that thing was available since at least I remember from 2000 onwards, at least because I was using it in 2004.
Okay.
20 years ago.
Maybe it uses this somehow, but
maybe, no idea.
Because this is quite old too.
Maybe they have a similar backend. Makes sense.
Okay, just about like linked open data, because I presented the 4 bullets of linked open science, but you also have the 5 stars of linked open data. And so the idea to make a data linked and open you need basically 5 points to check. It needs to be open license. So for example, it can be like just a PDF. But then it also needs to be machine readable, because a machine usually cannot read a PDF. You can, but the machine, I mean, they won't understand anything. They will just display the PDF, that's all. So, but the machine can understand, for example, an Excel sheet. They understand that there are several columns and that the columns are linked to a special line and stuff like that. So they can make some sense of it. Again, Excel has a problem. It's not an open format. You need Excel to modify it and save it under the same format. CSV, for example, is an open format. So you could use CSV. Now, CSV, the only problem is that your definitions on the CSV are only yours. Nobody can really reuse them. So if you're using URIs, Uniform Resource Identifier, that I talked about earlier, this makes it possible to link your data to addresses on the web, and these addresses are unique and refer to only one specific thing that you can identify, and will be the same for everybody. And finally, it needs to be linked. So by using the same identifiers as other people, it makes everybody, it makes everything linked, and so you can actually relate some data to other data sets, and that can be interesting too. Yeah, I just wanted to do a quick note about that.
What is LOD?
Linked open data.
And the format as well?
It's no, the format would be RDF.
But in the framework.
This thing.
Okay.
LOD is just a project, I guess, an initiative, a perspective, a dream. So yeah.
Okay, that's very interesting. Thank you.
Thank you.